Okay, thanks for letting me know, guys. Is the sound still bad, or is it better now? Okay, sound is better. Okay, all right. Yeah, please accept my sincere apologies about that. I think there's just an audio problem. Um, it seems as though each time I'm working in the office, there's a problem with the audio. But nevertheless, welcome everyone to today's session on how to write and edit a short story. Please also accept my sincere apologies if I am sounding a little bit mellow as I am still on the mend, but I am very determined that we are going to get through this workshop. Please remember that if you have any questions, we are going to have a Q&A session after this workshop where you can ask any questions that may pertain to the session or even the upcoming assignment. If you haven't started with assessment two, I plead with you that you start with it immediately. Also, if you did send me your draft last week, just before I went on sick leave, please resend the email as I am still catching up on emails that I have received in the last 7 days or so. So if I haven't responded to an email that you sent me last week, please remember to resend it. Okay. So today's agenda, or as I like to call workshop agenda, is that we are going to do a small check-in, and then we're going to delve into the first part on how does one write a short story. So we're going to contextualize the narrative text, and then we're going to look at the components of devising a narrative text. Afterwards, we're going to have a short break, two of the workshop, which is how to edit a narrative text. What are the steps into editing a narrative text? How does one visualize a narrative text? Dialogue, components of editing your narrative text, and technical aspects that pertain to editing your short story. So this is what we are going to be focusing on in today's in today's session. So before part one, let us allow perhaps 60 seconds or so where we just do a brief check-in on one another, where we capture how has our week been as people are working full-time or part-time, as students, just life in general. So I'm just going to give you around 60 seconds or so where you can comment on the chat box, where you basically tell us how your week has been, and then we are going to move on to part one of the workshop. Also, if anything interesting happens this past weekend, please feel free to share during this team check-in. Okay, so while people are typing in the chat box, um, perhaps let me touch on something that I have picked up on last week, just before I was booked off sick, which is regarding some of the drafts that I have received. Overall, I would say that I am quite pleased that students have produced some fairly satisfactory drafts. My approach in reading and giving feedback on drafts is that sometimes I prefer to be very strict in my feedback with the draft so that you have an idea of what the markers are actually expecting from you. So far thus far, I have been quite pleased with what students have produced, just to make sure that the feedback that you're given when you produce a draft, you apply the feedback. Because if you don't apply the feedback, then you cannot expect a reasonably great mark from the marker. So I think that is just something that I wanted to point out. But yeah, you still can't hear. Um, Let me see if I can fix it quickly. Is the sound much better now, or is it still like bad, bad, bad? So Maria says, while everyone else is typing in the chat box, Maria says that she is doing good today. I find Moody very intriguing. Her relationship with her Tanga and her bravery is very astonishing. I love the way Black love is celebrated in it. I can definitely concur with you, Maria, on that one. It's a very, very intriguing, a very thought-provoking novel, and also, to an extent, a very good reflective novel. Chantal says it's been a semi-productive 2 weeks. I have managed to complete the quiz assignment one. Um, Yourself when you have done that quiz. I always say to students that each time you are done with any kind of assessment, whether it's a quiz or a written assessment, please make sure that you celebrate because it's not easy to try and fit in all the schoolwork while you are working. I've managed to complete the quiz and with assignment two after the last online session, but then started looking at the academic integrity course last week to finish that up since it's due since it's due 30 March. It's taking a while to complete, so I haven't been able to look at the UK's K3701 again yet. I also have not yet had a chance to engage with any narrative texts yet. Thank you, Chantal, for letting us know. So I also have to do the integrity course as a PhD student. So I can definitely understand, if you experience a level of frustration in completing the course because it's no child's play. So I definitely feel you there in that aspect. So yeah, all the best with the academic interviews. I know that for a lot of people it is quite a bit of a pain. I also have to do it because I'm doing my PhD, so it definitely resonates with me when you express certain feelings towards that course. Okay. So while everyone else is typing their responses, I think I'm then going to move on to the first part, which is how to write a short story. And I want to preface this by providing you guys an excerpt from a novel that actually won some awards, right? It's a well-known novel in African literature. If you haven't heard about this novel, or if you find yourself quite curious and wanting to engage with this narrative text, I really do want to encourage you guys to look it up and just read up information on this novel. Why is it such a prolific novel when it comes to literature as a whole, and also African African literature. All right. So this particular, let me just see. This was our text for level two, right? Not exactly, Donette. It wasn't a prescribed text for level two. But anyway, so this excerpt is from Titi Gararenga's Nervous Condition. So I'm not sure if you guys have heard about the novel. If not, please look it up. So what we are going to do is that while I am reading or while I am contextualizing the short story, please do take time to read the excerpt so that when I start giving you information on how to write a narrative text, you can actually link this to the provided excerpt, because the excerpt itself is a very good example of of a narrative text, basically how to write a narrative text, right? So a narrative text, in essence, is a very short and a self-contained piece of text that places focus on the character, which is done by the author. And when we say focus on the character, we're talking about the protagonist, or even the antagonist in your short story. So when we say the major character in your short story, it doesn't necessarily have to be the good person. The story can also be told through the eyes of a villain, through the eyes um, of a tragic hero. And what the narrative text does is that it contains what we call a plot. And this is unfolded within the context of the short story, a very limited time frame. And it aims to explore or touch on the central theme of your own choosing, or the overarching themes or an idea that you want to put out there. So when you look at this provided excerpt, what do you think the central theme is, or what the overarching plot is? So this is something that I would like you to think about and also make a note of when you go through this text, this excerpt in your own time. So when you're preparing for the upcoming assignment, it's very important that you be extremely selective in the setting of your short story, as well as the kind of language that you're going. So the setting, in essence, it informs how many characters you are going to be putting in this narrative text. The language also also informs how many characters and what kind of characters you're going to be putting into this narrative text. So in the past, for example, last year, second semester, a lot of students felt in writing the narrative text because you found that, oh, okay, this student chose a very elaborate setting that contains so many things. And as a result, it was very difficult to write a short excerpt about character A, character B, character C, character D. So please be very, very selective in the setting that you are going to be choosing in your short story. So if you want your short story to take place in the living room where a murder just took place, very simple setting, very simple plot storyline, that is that is perfectly fine. So what you do as a writer, even though you're a registered student for this module, I'm going to call you a writer. So your role as a writer here is to actually capture a moment in your text. And in this moment for the audience, for the reader, needs to evoke some kind of emotion, right? So if you're going to write a scene about a murder that takes place, that the murder itself, that is the moment, right? And what it is going to evoke for us as the reader is a sense of discomfort, a sense of shock that, oh my goodness, something so tragic just happened. So this, in essence, is what I mean when I say your role as a writer is to capture a moment, a significant moment, in order to evoke a certain emotion for you, from your reader, right? And this kind of moment, this significant moment in your narrative text, it needs to leave a lasting impact on me as the reader of the text. So the short story or the narrative text is written in a literary form. So this is where you are able to explore themes and also develop your character. So when I say literary form, what I mean is genre. So does this narrative text fall under drama? Does it fall under comedy? Does it fall under suspense? Does it fall under psychological thriller for that matter? Does it fall under psychosexual thriller? Right. So that is what I mean when I use the term literary form. So short stories in hindsight um, for many aspiring writers can actually be difficult to write because the elements of the short story, which I will get into just now, are not executed very well. So, for example, last year I had a student was doing her third year, and then for the short story section, she felt that she deserved a better mark because she felt that the strength of writing the short story lied within the plot. And that the short story, how it ended with a really nice twist that actually kept us, the reader, um, in deep thought. And because of that, the student felt that she deserved a much better mark and that the external marker was sort of unfair. So I had to review the student's short story and I had to explain to the student that, listen, the marker here in this particular case was in fact fair because you could not execute the elements of devising a short story. And unfortunately, you could not use the rubric, doesn't engage with the rubric quite well. All right. So please ensure that when I give you information on the elements that pertain to writing a short story, please make sure that you effectively utilize them in assessment 2 and assessment 3. So before I proceed to the next slide, are there any other questions? Does anyone have any questions regarding the short story or this slide? Okay, I see that sound is still a bit of a problem. Um, if it continues to be a problem, then I think what I will have to do is that I will have to reschedule to tomorrow, reschedule the workshop session to tomorrow if sound still continues to be a problem. In the office today, and it seems that this kind of technicality always happens when I when I have to work in the office. So just comment on the chat box where the sound is still a bit of a problem. Okay. Other than that, does anyone have any questions regarding this slide before I proceed to the next slide? Okay. So I'm going to assume there aren't any questions. Here we go. We have a question from the guys. When trying to capture a moment, when trying to capture a moment with the same strategy applied when recounting past events that are linked to that moment. So, for example, a killer reflecting on his first kill. Yes, absolutely. That is 100. That's 100%. That's 100% correct. Right. Um, okay. So let me then just move on to the next slide, which talks about um, components of devising a short story. So Hanina asks, and she asks a very, very good question, by the way. She asks, how I would like to ask, how do you introduce a third person, right? So if you're going to be writing your short story from a third person's point of view, this is where you would have to omit personal pronouns such as your I, me, and write from a bird's eye point of view. So if you want to capture a moment within the first 3 lines of of your short story, in essence, what you're doing is that instead of um, instead of using personal pronouns, then obviously you're going to lean towards using pronouns such as um, she could not believe what happened, or Mrs. Or character A just witnessed what it would be a memory, an everlasting memory, something like that. So that is how you would actually introduce a third person, in essence, writing from a third eye point of view. So when you look at the components of devising a short story, first thing we're going to touch on is dialogue. So with the dialogue, this is where you, the writer, are going to be writing the way that your characters speak, and you have to do this as realistic as you possibly can. I think there is a term for this, and it is called demotic writing. So that's where you write exactly the way your characters speak. So when I say that your dialogue here has to be very, very realistic, you need to keep in mind that not every character, not every character in your short story speaks formal English and uses language that is strictly formal, speaks in complete sentences, speaks so economically. So please ensure that the dialogue is actually as realistic as you possibly can be. So if your protagonist here, for example, is in her 20s, she recently graduated drama or even music from a university, and because of that, during her studies, she's had to overcome quite a lot of obstacles such as financial exclusion, not being able to get a place at res because she's owing the institution so much money. Obviously, she's not going to be someone who's going to speak so economically, so formal. unlike someone who is a vice president of a company. So having said that, the character circumstances, how the character grew up, what the character had to overcome, often influences the way that the character speaks, the way that this character has relationships or develops relationships with certain people, how this character interacts with other people. So please keep this in mind when you are using dialogue in your story. So if there is a scuffle between two, if you're writing a scene where there's a scuffle between two rugby players, obviously the language that you're going to use in that dialogue is not going to be formal language like "How dare you? Such obscene behavior. This is unacceptable." No, because you're writing a scene that involves two rugby players getting into a scuffle. So this is why dialogue that is very realistic is actually very, very important. Then what you will do in your own time, you will see that I have provided an example here, which you will go through in your own time. But just to reflect on this particular example, yeah, I say that even though this information might sound generic for some of you, a lot of students still tend to poorly execute aspects of dialogue in a short story. And because of that, they actually get penalized for it. And what's quite interesting is that students who often get penalized for not executing dialogue properly. When I go through my email history, I see that, oh, okay, no, this student, I don't remember, this student didn't, send me a draft or didn't send proper draft, for feedback, and it's one of the reasons why he or she kind of got penalized for not executing dialogue well. So this example, when you read through it in your own time, I want you to carefully note the difference between the way this narrator of this excerpt speaks and Melo. There's a big difference between how these two characters speak. And that's the dialogue in the short story. It should be utilized in the following ways. So information, right? The information that you provide in the character's dialogue helps your reader make sense of the story, right? So, for example, Melo here is reflecting on how she actually never gets roles for television, right? And when a character is is when we as the reader are trying to get to know the character, we're getting to know the character through how he or she speaks and the character's word choice. So dialogue here is indicative of a character's personality trait. So is this person a nice person? Is she a not so nice person? Or is this person a straight up bitch? Right. Sorry for my French, but I just had to be very frank and lay it out there. And then a character speech pattern, in other words, how a character speaks, the character's use of vocabulary, slang, word choice, and the overall demeanor helps the reader situate the character within the context of the short story. Okay. So, and another thing, please ensure that you follow what I like to call, sorry, I just had to switch off my phone. Please ensure that you follow the conventions, you adhere to the conventions of the short story, right? Which is that each speech, when a character starts speaking, right, immediately it has to start in a new paragraph. In the past, I have read short stories where a short story where um, when a character starts speaking, right, it's a new paragraph. And then when the other character speaks, they don't write it in a new paragraph, but put it in the same paragraph where character A is speaking. So please, please, please ensure that whenever a character is speaking, the dialogue has to start in a new paragraph, right? And then the dialogue, in other words, is what is spoken by the character must be put in double quotation marks. I don't know why people still use single quotation marks at this level in a creative writing module. I don't know why, but it's something that I still pick up even now. So please put it in double quotation marks, not single quotation marks. Single quotation marks in the short story are only applicable when you are introducing a foreign term, a foreign concept that the reader might not know what it is. If your character is having conversation with another character and this character is actually recalling an event while doing something, like she is drinking water, drinking tea, please make sure that the actions form part of the dialogue. So, for example, here, the sentence that is written in red, circled in red, that is what I mean by the dialogue. So please ensure that you adhere to the conventions of writing dialogue, especially if your character is busy doing something while she is saying something to another character. So the action and the dialogue by the same character cannot be written in two separate paragraphs. Notice how I'm just going to circle this. Notice how the action and the dialogue of one character, the very same character, it is in one paragraph, not two separate paragraphs. All right. And as a writer, yes, you are allowed to use phrases such as he said, she said, to indicate who is doing or who is saying what or doing what. However, try and not overuse the he said, she said. That's stuff that you would find a lot in a high school reading an essay in high school. Also, if your character is in a deep thought, right, she's thinking about something, right, and she wants to say something to this person, but she cannot physically say it, right? So, in other words, thoughts that are actually unspoken. Then what you do is that you write it in italics. So, for example, here, this character is saying something, right, to another character, right? But then because she doesn't have the guts to say, oh my goodness, this person is so overly sensitive, she like says it to herself internally. So what you do is that you write that in italics. So the sentence that is circled in red, that is an example of an unspoken thought by a character, but this person doesn't have the courage to actually say it to that other person. So before I get to characterization, does anyone have any questions? Any questions? And when I say, does anyone have any questions? My philosophy is speak now or forever hold your peace. Okay. So then we're going to get into characterization. So when it comes to characterization, you need to have an idea, or well, not necessarily an idea, but you need to know who your characters are in your text. This includes both minor and major characters. And each of the characters that you have decided are going to be in your story needs to have a role, a very important role. Right? So if let's say you have a character in mind that you're going to be putting in your story, but you realize, okay, but this particular character is only going to say a sentence or two, then remove that character, right? So where I'm going with this is that the fewer the characters that you have, the fewer characters you have in your short story, the better. Try and keep your characters to a bare minimum. For a short story, at least less than five. Because if you have too many characters in your short story, it's going to be very difficult for the reader to discern what role each character each character plays. And this is why you have to be very, very careful in the setting of your short story. So try and avoid public spaces like a movie theater, a public setting like a restaurant, a public setting like a big event, because it's going to be very difficult to assign roles that each character plays, because your narrative text takes place in such a public setting. Okay. So please avoid confusing the reader, in this case, the marker, by switching between the first names and the second names of your character. So if, for example, your character's name is Lindo Kuhle, avoid writing things like Lindo Kuhle in the first sentence, and then in the second sentence you say Nespagati, and then in the next sentence you say Lindo Kuhle, and then in the last sentence you say Pagati. So this is a very common mistake that we have picked up. So I really want you to try and avoid, um, switching between first and last names of the character. Like choose how this character is going to be addressed and stick to it. All right. And then also avoid things like your generic names, like your John Doe, your Jane Doe, and your Mary Smith. With a If, for example, you're going to be writing a short story and it falls under crime, like a crime suspense, right? And a person uh, has been found dead because he or she went missing, then in that particular context, you are allowed to use terms like your John Doe or your Jane Doe. Or if a character has been wheeled into the hospital, this character doesn't have an ID or driver's license, and the doctors are trying to figure out who is the next of kin that we contact, then you're allowed to use words such as John Doe or Jane Doe. But generic character names, please avoid using them, and also avoid using extravagant like names, because you're trying to sound a little bit different, like your Rumpelstiltskin, Ram's Bottom, your Zeus, your Tamoxiline, Barbabutanol, those type of names. But if perhaps, for example, you're going to be writing a science fiction, dystopian science fiction, then one can actually make an exception there. Furthermore, please do not introduce too many characters in your short story. So for me as a reader, I cannot keep up reading a scene that involves 10 world leaders that are sitting at G20 and they're talking about global warming and they're busy anticipating about the next pandemic. Please try and keep your characters to a bare minimum. Also, be very creative in the biographical sketches of your character. So, your characters here doesn't have to be this typical woman in the 30s or in the 40s who has blonde hair, blue eyes, medium height, nice and skinny. Just pay close attention to who you are staying with, who you interact with. Obviously, they are not that typical blonde hair, blue eyes, skinny, in the 30s, um, slim and all of those things. So when you're describing the character's appearance in your short story, take note of the personal background, the physical appearance, and the personality traits that make this person human. So personality traits being both good and also bad personality traits, right? So with that, this is a very good example here of character. And this is something that you can read in your own time, but just take note that the information in red I've indicated is an example of personal background. The information in green, that is an example of the person's appearance. And the personality traits, that's the information that I have written um, in, in orange. Then we have point of view, right? So with your point of view, I always tell the student that you need to select a point of view that you feel this is where your writing is going to come through. This is where your storytelling is really going to come through. So most people end up doing first person narrative style, which there's absolutely nothing wrong with that because with first person narrative style, you are telling events and experiences from the perspective of that character using the personal pronoun like I. And most authors actually use this narrative style because they want to create a sense of intimacy between the reader and also the character. And what it does in the long run is that you, as the reader, want to feel that you're actually part of the story. So if you're going to choose first person narrator, just remember that you're choosing this because you want the marker, you want the reader to feel like they're actually part of your story. Then there is second person narrator, where the author directly addresses the reader using words such as you. And what you're actually, in essence, doing is that you're just breaking that fourth wall. Not many students actually use second person narrative style. I think in my years of teaching this module, I haven't come across an assignment or even a portfolio where a student has used second person narrative style. And then with the third person, this is where you're creating a distance between the writer and the reader using pronouns such as she, he, they, etc. And it is written from a bird's eye point of view, right? Um, what is the solution to ask success rate of writing in second person? So at an academic level, I would say not so much, simply because the student would unknowingly switch between second person and third person, right? So a lot of the time, people tend to confuse second person narrative style with the third person narrative style, and because of that, the text in its entirety it actually falls flat. So there hasn't really been a good success rate in writing second person. Most writers, even well-known writers, they either do first person or third person narrative style. So with the plot, this is where you're going to delve into the overall atmosphere of the story. Objects, where these objects placed, and the texture of these objects. And you can also delve into this is where you can also delve into the characters' surroundings and the overall atmosphere, which play a very important role in executing dialogue, character, and also setting. Um, Another thing that I must also stress is that when you're writing a short story, please don't feel limited in what kind of story am I supposed to write. So, for example, 2 years ago, I had a first year student who wrote a short story, and the genre was erotica, like as in 50 Shades of Grey type of thing, but like in a South African version of 50 Shades of Grey. And at first, the student was a little bit, hesitant to submit a short story like this because it was a short story that was very, very like explicit, like sexually explicit. And the student wanted to double check, am I allowed to produce a short story of this nature? And I said, yes, you are allowed to because, it falls under a genre of erotica as a genre. So when you write a short story, please do not feel limited to what kind of short story you're allowed to produce, what kind of language you can use in your short story. If your character wants to use inflammatory language, like dropping a lot of F bombs because that character is just, angry about something, then feel free to do that, right? Then we have the last aspect, which is the log line. So the log line here, this is where you are going to condense your entire story into one or two sentences where you state and the main characters. So the log line here, what it does is that you are trying to sell the story, right? In essence, you're trying to convince us why we should continue reading your short story. So for assessment three, the portfolio, you'll see that in some parts of the creative writing task, it says that you need to include a log line for the short story, include a log line um, for for the play. So Simon Samkela asks, is it a good idea to write your short story in past tense, like telling a story about a character's childhood throughout the story? Yes, you may certainly do so, as long as you are strictly sticking to one narrative style, right? Choose the narrative style and you need to stick to it throughout the short story. So I think in your case, Kayla, an appropriate narrative style would be third person because the entire story is being written in past tense. And just to answer your question, Chantal, just remember to strictly stick to um, narrative style throughout the short story. Okay. Then what we're going to do, we're going to take a very short break, 5 minutes, and afterwards, we're going to look at editing. How does one edit a short a short story? So during a break, you can grab yourself something to drink. You can start devising questions you may have for the assessment or the workshop. So we will be back at 10:52. Back at 10:52. Okay. Hope you guys had a lovely 5 minute break. If you have not done so, please ensure that you subscribe to the YouTube channel where I'm going to upload recorded sessions of these workshops because students have been informing me that they've been struggling to access the recordings through the OneDrive link or through the SharePoint link that I've included in my modules. All right. So if you haven't done so, please get notification of any new uploads. And you will notice that I've also uploaded workshops from last year so that you have access to more than one lesson material when you go through them in your own time. So the second part of this workshop is that we're going to look at how to edit a short story. And I think it would be appropriate to start off with a nice epigraph by Ralph Waldo Emerson. And he says that the writer is an explorer and that every step is an advance into a new land. And I think this, in essence, captures not only what storytelling is about, but what editing a story is actually about. So when it comes to editing a short story, there are some things that you need to keep in mind. The first thing is that you need to have a very clear vision of your characters. So you need to start a character within a setting of your choice. So notice how in the beginning I said that you have to be very, very careful in which setting that you must choose. Okay? So your character here doesn't really have to be a protagonist. It can also be an anti-hero. Can anyone give me an example of a character that is an anti-hero? So this can be from a short story, a novel, or even a movie for that matter, or even a Japanese manga or an anime you might have watched. An example of an anti-hero. Okay, so Chantal says Dexter. Yes, that is correct. Um, was Draco Malfoy be considered anti-hero? Yes. So just keep in mind, guys, the anti-hero, right? This is a person, right, who is like not necessarily a good person, but not necessarily a bad person, but is someone who actually lacks qualities of what a hero should be. And that the actions that he or she does, the outside world will perceive it to be no, this is wrong. But from his perspective, his actions are because of they are done for the greater good, right? So think of that when I say anti-hero, right? If I'm gonna say is Batman, um, to a degree, one can say yes. If you're referring to like the early editions of Batman, perhaps yes. I think one can also throw in the Joker as an anti-hero. All right. So this is I would say this is a challenge, right, to all of you that when you're writing or editing your short story, through the eyes of your main character, see if maybe you can write a short story through the lens of an anti-hero. All right. So when it comes to editing, look at the character's mannerisms and also the overall demeanor. And this plays in the language and style of your writing. Okay. Here also determine the path of this character. So do you foresee a death, a happy ending, a cliffhanger, or even an opening that is an ending that is open for interpretation? All right. Then I think setting I have spoken about it. With the setting, guys, just remember with editing, like the setting of your short story, in order for you to excel in editing the setting of your short story, you need to be able to use the correct descriptive words in the setting. In other words, use the correct or the appropriate adjectives in your setting. Okay. And then you have actions and then the events of your main character. So what's the significant event that your character belongs to, which actually speaks to the genre of your. So this can either be a conflict or an action. And as a writer, you have to decide how is this going to end. So is the conflict or the action going to be resolved, or is it again going to be open for interpretation? Another aspect that I really want to stress on because last year I saw that it was still is using transitional phrases in your short story, right? So what do I mean by using transitional phrases? So some short stories often lack what we call structure, and this is because the writer doesn't use the correct transitional phrase or has completely omitted using transitional phrases. So what transitional phrases do is that they are used to link events, points of view, build tension between characters and scenes. So in essence, what they do is that your paragraphs and sentences must be linked with one another in the creative writing context through the use of transitional phrases. So if, for example, right, I'm giving you three examples here. If you are writing a scene where you are trying to contrast two events or points of views, or scenes, or even characters actually see the same thing differently, then these are the transitional phrases you are likely going to use. Right. Then, if you are going to be comparing two scenes, notice how the first one is contrasting. If you're going to be comparing two scenes, two events, or two points of views in your short story, then these are the transitional phrases that you are going to most likely use. Okay, so in terms of contrasting and comparing, I always go back to the analogy of a road rage incident. Like you're driving on the freeway and you see some road rage happening. So me as a driver might see the same incident differently because I would think that this buggy was in the wrong, but then the car that is next to me will say no, this the buggy wasn't in the wrong, it was actually the hatchback that was in the wrong. So that is what I mean by contrasting. Contrasting, and then when comparing, this is where me as the driver and also that driver that is next to me will feel that, oh, okay, no, this very same buggy in this road rage incident is actually in the wrong. All right. Then when it comes to time, right, if time goes by in a short story, in your short story, then these are the transitional phrases that you are most likely going to use. Okay, so it is very, very important that when you are writing a scene, writing your sentences or writing your paragraphs in your short story, please use the correct transitional phrases by using this particular slide. I don't think it is in any of your tutorial letters, but I do feel it is important that I will stress the importance of using transitional phrases in your short story. It is also one of the reasons why in the real world out there, when you're asked to submit a short story, right, for a creative writing journal or at a publishing house, and then you get that rejection letter and they say, I regret to inform you, your submission has not been accepted. I can tell you right now, because I know someone who actually runs a publishing company, that one of the reasons that they actually reject a story, any kind of story, is because writers tend to omit these technical aspects, like using transitional phrases in the story. So please ensure that you use the correct ones in your assignment. Then with the dialogue, right? Yes, dialogue can be quite challenging, because aspects of your dialogue, which is character, plot, and setting, you either omit them or you don't execute them properly, right? So with the character, here you need to decide which character is saying what and how is that character saying it, right? What are the emotions that this character is experiencing, right? And when is either doing something or saying something to another character, right? Your dialogue has to showcase the character's personality, occupation, sense of upbringing, and also overall appearance. Then there's plot, right? Is the specific event, right, that occurred in your short story which has compelled the character to react in a certain way? Right? For example, your main character has witnessed the accident on the N2 and has reacted with shock. Something that last year during the festive season. Uh, who did your main character express his or her thoughts to when there is an event that is actually unfolding? And does your character get along with other characters in the short story? And then lastly, what are your characters in the short story? Something that I should also point when it comes to to characters, and also point of view, right? You are allowed to have a character that is that is non-binary. You are allowed to have a character that perhaps identifies himself as non-binary, and because of that, he uses the they pronoun, something like that. Just remember, and I think I did specify in, I think, assessment 3 or assessment 2, that you are allowed to include a footnote or an endnote where you contextualize your approach to the writing task, and that the lecturer has actually given you the go ahead. So that is something that I thought I should just point out. Then setting. So where is the dialogue here taking place? And does your character here engage with his or her overall senses in the setting, right? And what are the character surroundings, and how does that character view the surroundings? And lastly, what does the setting tell us about the the character? Okay. So very, very important. Make sure that you execute all three aspects on editing when it comes to the dialogue, right? Then the second aspect. This is something that is applicable, I would say, in the real life setting. So if, for example, there's a book that you're writing and you want to actually publish this book, you want it to be on Takealot, you want it to be on Amazon, you want it to be on Books a Million exclusive books, then this slide would be applicable to you. So just to briefly contextualize it, ideally in the editing process for publishing purposes, there are 17 steps that you should follow. And you need to follow these on the desk of the publisher or the literary agent, then it's complete in its form. It looks brand new. It has no errors of that sort. So that is just something that you can go through if, for example, you want to explore um, writing for writing for publishing. Then, in terms of the language in your short story, so we normally use the language convention, the British language conventions when it comes to spelling. Another easy way to detect whether an assignment is actually AI generated without using Turnitin is that AI, what it does is that it'll give you a short story and it'll stick to American language conventions. So that is spelling, that is also how sentences are written, and also the vocabulary. So please remember to stick to the British language conventions, but in other words, the South African British language conventions and not the American conventions, because as an institution, we use the British language conventions. And if you want more information on, examples of British language conventions versus the American language conventions, then just click on the hyperlink that I have provided for you. Another easy way is that when you are writing your short story on your computer, please remember to set the language and the spelling to British and not American. I once made that mistake, and I once made that mistake where I got myself a brand new laptop. My supervisor asked me to send in a draft a draft chapter, and then I got, upon getting feedback, I saw so many red lines because I forgot to set my computer to British language conventions instead of the American language conventions. So please ensure that you adhere to the language conventions. So Chantal asks a very good question. She asks, will these slides be made available to download? I couldn't find the new version of the poetry on sources, just the recording under announcements. Yes, so what I did was that I actually did update the additional resources folder just before classes started, where I uploaded past um, presentations from the first workshop and also the poetry section. But that should be available on under the additional resources shelf. And if you are still struggling to download the study material, the tutorial letters, for example, I've also uploaded those on the additional resources folder, because it seems that, I don't know, it's an IT related issue where the study material will be there, next thing it vanishes, comes back on, then it vanishes. So if you still can't access them, you can access them now on the additional resources folder on my modules. Let me just have a look at your screenshot and tell. Okay, okay, yeah, I don't know why it's still doing that. I think I will just contact Prof and bring it to his attention that yeah, the slides are not showing, but then I'll send you guys another email again and attach those PowerPoint presentations, including today's PowerPoint presentation. And are there any other questions regarding the workshop, regarding the assessment? Yes, Dlamol. Yeah, you have to use the British English, because yeah, South Africa uses the British English language conventions. Nabashi says, I have a question. When the time comes for a character's personality to change due to events of the short story, is there a way of conveying this change to readers without it being too jarring and sudden? Yeah, this I think this all it all ties back to the transitional phrases that you use. So if you're going to omit using a transitional phrase to show that this specific event led to a character changing, then for a reader it is going to come across as very sudden. So be very selective in what transitional phrase you're going to use to indicate to me that this character's personality has changed because perhaps he was human, and then they decided to turn him into a cyborg, right? So again, be very, very selective of what transitional phrase you're going to use, because if you're going to omit that, then your short story is going to um, come across as very jarring, very, very sudden. And then Chantal asked, where can we find the 10 laws of writing short stories? I believe that should be in the library under the e-reserve section. Um, but I will try and source it by myself and upload it on the additional resources folder. Then are there any other questions? Those who sent me their drafts last week before I went on sick leave, may I ask that you please resend them to me, or send me emails last week before I went on sick leave. And I ask that you resend them to me again, so that I can actually get onto them ASAP. When I opened my emails this morning, I saw that just during the days that I was sick, I have 286 unread emails. So I ask that you please resend those emails from last week. And then I see Wanandi, your hand is up. The floor is yours.
Hi there. So I just want to know, can I use last year's short story, like can I continue on it?
Oh, yes, absolutely. Yeah. Yes, you're more than welcome to do that. Yeah, we had a student who also asked the question, but with poetry. But yes, you are more than welcome.
Thank you.
Right. All right, fantastic. But otherwise, I think I will just bring this session to a close. And if you have any other questions, please drop me an email. And I hope that this year I will see a lot of distinctions in the assessments. I know that I will see a lot of distinctions. So please make sure that you do your utmost best. So Chantal asks a very, very good question. If you are going to use last year's short story, how would you actually reference it? And this is a very good question, given the fact that Turnitin has been enabled. So I'm just going to comment on the chat box by including a reference on how to reference last year's short story in an assessment for this year. Mm. Okay. All right. So in the chat box, I've included a reference on if you're going to use a text from last year's assignment and you're going to use it in this year's assignment. And it is very important that you do so if you're going to be using stuff from last year in this year's, because Turnitin has been enabled, and Turnitin is going to pick up stuff from last year as well. So this is how you would actually reference a text from last year. Chantal asked, would you need to cite it after every sentence you've used from the short story or after each paragraph? No, you don't. You don't have to. What you can do is that at the end of the short story, the end of that text, just include you insert an end note or a footnote. And then in that end note, you will just include your reference, in-text reference, right? So the in-text reference must only be inserted at the end note, not at the end of the text, not in each and every sentence that of that text. Okay, I hope that makes sense. I hope that makes sense. Just ask me to explain it again if it doesn't make sense. So I'm going to ask, can you write a short story for assignment purposes in any genre? Yes, it can be any genre. Okay, I see there aren't any other questions. So what I'll do is that I will then stop recording. Okay. All right. Other than that, everyone, thank you very much for today's session. This is going to be uploaded onto the YouTube channel, and then the copy of the presentations will also be sent to you. But other than that, please have a wonderful day.